using the Catch the Eye function on your voting machine. After having inserted your voting card, during question time, interventions will take place from your seat, and I invite all speakers to stick to the allocated speaking time. Once again, you can register through the voting machine, and I'd like to ask you to do that right now. Let's begin with the first question. Colleague Šojdrová is our first speaker.
Dobrý den, děkuji,
Good afternoon, Commissioner, President. We know that prices are going up, energy prices are going up, and that has ramifications on the growth in food prices. If we look at inflation, if we look at how the share of food prices as a part of overall inflation, it's obvious that following on from energy, food prices constitute the second biggest share of payments, and that has a massive impact on consumers. But how did this kick off? Well, we know that there are farmers who are not gaining anything from this growth in prices. They're dependent on foodstuffs being sold. So my question to the Commissioner is, how do you want to make sure that farmers are being supported? Because they're suffering from inflation greatly.
Frau Kollegin Šojdrová, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Madam Šojdrová. Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much. Maybe thank you, Ms. Šojdrová, for your question. Yes, we can observe the increase of the food prices. That's general inflation in European Union is 11%, comparing November to November, 21-22. But food inflation is 18.3%. We can observe different situation across the sectors, across the member states. But you're right that farmers' incomes was increased in last year, 13%, but also there are differences across the member states. Not everywhere they increased, but it is easy to observe that increase of the farmers' incomes is less than increase of food prices. And increase of agriculture costs comparing 21-22, the cost of production is about 30%. Increase of agriculture prices of agricultural products is 24%. It shows that increase of cost is not fully compensated by the increase of prices which farmers receive. What we can do, of course, the fertilizer prices. This is the main factor of increase of the agriculture cost. Also energy, what you said. We presented our fertilizer communication. There is possible support on the member states level, support for the fertilizer producers, for the farmers. State aid for the farmers, possible amount €250,000 per individual farm. This is what we main instrument which we propose. Of course, there is a common agricultural policy, but the strategic plans, but it will be in the future, in the coming years, implemented. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Well, thank you very much. Madam Šojdrová.
Děkuji za odpověď, pane komisaři.
Thank you very much for that answer. I do have a supplementary question, Commissioner. Your answer is one I can't accept for this year, 2023, because there's a calculation that inflation will be taken into consideration for funding the common agricultural policy. Does that mean that we'll be able to see conditions extended and improved for the use of the new Common Agricultural Policy, because that would help farmers as well.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Schödrova. Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Madam Schroedter. Commissioner, please.
Mogę dodać do mojej odpowiedzi już teraz
Here I may add, I'll be speaking Polish right now. I can add that in our communication on fertilizers, we've listed ways of encouraging industry. Member states can alter their strategic plans as of the 1st of January. And we are listing ways of proposing new ways of working that will make farmers less dependent on fertilizers. Fertilizers have the greatest weight in the structure of cost. So there will be programs which will be encouraging farmers, for instance, to produce their own fertilizer in a natural way. But many answers to your question will lay outside of the realm of CAP and outside of the realm of responsibilities of commissioner responsible for farming and agriculture. We are thinking about imposing caps on gas price. We have the caps on gas prices and activities that are undertaken across the board. But we are using CAP and public aid in the individual member states. This is what we can do in short term. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Colleague Kamalashis will take the floor now.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, we know that the major problem of price inflation in Europe is not as a result so much of supplies, but the increases in energy prices and the price of fertilizers, and it has to be said, a degree of speculation on the markets has all led to an upsurge in prices, and that is above all hitting the most vulnerable families. We know that there's a huge burden to their family budget as a result of expenditure on food. So we have vehemently defended the package of measures, a solidarity package for families and firms. We've also called for ongoing support measures to keep energy costs down on the market and so forth. Now, what I would like to know from the Commission is this. What other measures could be implemented, not just to support our farmers, but also to help the most vulnerable families across the European Union? Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Carvalhes.
Thank you very much, colleague Carvalhes. Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much for this question. And no, first of all, I'd like to mention that the situation is different across the member states. Increase of food prices is the EU average is 18.3%, but we can in all member states is more than 10%. But the less is in Luxembourg, which is 10.8%. The highest inflation is now in Hungary, 49.2%. No, I cannot exclude there is speculation is one of the factors, but it is possible, but Commission has no evidence that now this is the responsibility of the member states to act against the speculation on the market if this is observed. This is also the differences between the type of products. About the agricultural products, the main increase of prices is for cereals, about the 45%. Next is eggs, milk, more than 30%, and the rest less than 30%. Potatoes, poultry, pig meat, and the beef, etc. This is less than 30%. No, thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Wojciechowski.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Colleague Corrales.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm over on this side of the chamber. I don't know whether you noticed where I actually am. You seem to be looking constantly in another direction, rather than over here. Well, thank you for all the information you've provided to us. Come what may, I'm keen to see what more the Commission can do to protect the interest of the most vulnerable consumers. I'm grateful to you anyway for the explanation you've given us in those details. Thank you.
Das war jetzt keine Frage mehr. Dann
That wasn't really a question.
Herr Kollege Flecho.
Colleague Flejo.
Hvala, poštovani predsjedniče.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, if inflation is a problem in the European Union, then in Croatia it is a huge problem because during the past 2 months our inflation is more than 13%. And if we speak about inflation of food prices, this is an extremely huge problem. In Croatia, we introduced euro on the 1st of January, and the prices skyrocketed. Somebody will say the situation was similar in Italy and Slovenia, but the figures were much lower than today in Croatia. That is why I would like to put a question. Are you aware of this problem of synergy between inflation and the rounding up of prices and in Croatia, and whether you can do anything in order to stop this trend, in order to protect the most vulnerable citizens and to prevent them from diving into poverty?
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Flecho.
Thank you very much, colleague Flejo. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję bardzo. No mogę potwierdzić.
Thank you very much. Yes, I can confirm in Croatia, I'm aware of it. Before the euro already, there was a problem because Croatia has one of the highest inflation rates when it comes to foodstuffs and their prices. General prices have increased by 19.8. Well, this is an average for the EU. I'm not able to comment on what has happened after the euro has been introduced. We do not have full data in this respect yet, so I'm not well placed to make comments on this, but I have been listening to you very carefully. The data which I have at my disposal compare November 2022 and November 2021. If you are asking about Croatia precisely, I can tell you that it was 19.8% inflation for foodstuffs. For cereals and bread and other cereals, bread products 27.7, milk 26.5, and lower increases for vegetables and fruit and other products. Thank you.
Bitte, Herr Kollege Flecho, eine Zusatzfrage.
Yes, an additional question, colleague Flejo.
Thank you very much for your reply, which actually confirms everything I have said. Could you please provide a specific answer to the question? Will the fight against inflation of prices of foodstuffs be your priority for 2023? And if so, which measures are you going to apply? Thank you.
Dankeschön. Bitte, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, please.
Tak, no ja mogę się wypowiedzieć.
Yes, well, in this debate, what I can tell you is about what we are going to do under the CAP. New strategic plans are one such measure to support farmers. Our farmers are up to the task. We have seen it. They are working under very difficult circumstances. The energy price has skyrocketed, the fertilizers, the feed. All of this is increasingly expensive, but we still have food security thanks to our farmers. We need to support them using all the instruments which we have at our disposal thanks to the CAP. I would like to refer back to one of the questions which perhaps I haven't answered precisely. There is an inflation affecting the CAP which is being devalued. The budget of the CAP is about 55 billion euro annually. If you compare it to the value of the whole agriculture production, which has increased due to inflation, it has increased from 450 billion euro to 536 billion euro. But the expenditure on the CAP has not changed, despite inflation, despite the increased value of agricultural production. We can now experience this problem, but of course the budget is decided by the member states. This pertains to the whole budget of the EU and to the budget of the CAP. Nowadays, this budget might be less effective and might be less of an incentive for the farmers. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Colleague van den Kinderen, please. You have the floor.
Dank u wel.
Thank you very much, President. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. Because everybody who says inflation refers to energy prices, of course, but obviously we need to look at food prices as well. That's what we're looking at. Now, food prices have gone up and we can see symptoms there, but we need to look at the root causes as well. Given food price inflation and inflation in general, then I think there are problems of artificial manure, whose prices have skyrocketed. If we look at artificial manure, we're dependent on third countries, non-EU countries. Heads of state and government in their Versailles Declaration said that we have to become more independent of third countries, and they've even called for the establishment of a European protein strategy. So my question to you is, has the European Commission already worked on this European protein strategy, and if so, when can we expect a proposal from you? Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege van den Kendelaar. Herr Kommissar.
Za to pytanie. Tak, no przede wszystkim.
Thank you very much for this question. Well, yes, we must underscore the fact that food prices are growing faster than inflation, just because the increase in the cost of production has affected the food production much stronger, to a greater degree than other areas of production. The increase of energy prices has affected the entire economy, but farming has been affected by higher prices of fertilizers, regardless of the prices of energy. So this is why inflation is so clearly visible in the area of food products. As for fertilizers, the European Commission has proposed everything that we could have proposed within the realm of our competences. We have proposed all of these instruments that could be applied. Most of them are in the realm of decisions of the individual member states that may decide whether they wish or not to provide support to their domestic producers of fertilizers. For instance, in Poland, I know that this is being envisaged. This should lead to the lowering of prices of fertilizer, which will translate into food prices. But let us remember that not everything will depend on the cost of fertilizer, and that food prices are not exclusively dependent on the activity of farmers. We see that farmers are not the beneficiaries of this increase in food prices, because some people try to interpret it in this way. They say, well, prices have risen, and so farmers are receiving more in exchange for their products. So their position will be better. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Farming revenue has not risen to an extent equal or sufficient to compensate inflation. And I hope that the new strategic plans, which are very flexible and which are being proposed, will help us overcome the situation. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're talking about chemical fertilizers, and indeed I'm looking forward to your action plan on integrated nutrient management. And I think we have a place there for that. But I'm talking about specifically the timing of your European protein strategy. Could you maybe give an answer to that?
Tak, dziękuję. Nie odpowiedziałem panu posłowi, że przeoczyłem.
Well, thank you very much. I haven't answered this question. My apologies. Yes, we are working on this document, and at this point, we don't know whether this is going to be a strategy or a communication from the European Commission. This is not yet certain, but we are working on that. We're working on an idea, a concept for the development of protein crops in Europe, which is very important in order to ensure a greater autonomy of our farming. And this is partly the result of my statements during one of the previous debates at the European Parliament, where I mentioned the need for such a strategic approach to these food crops. And this document will certainly see the light of day.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Ich weise darauf hin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we're trying to strike a balance between the groups. And now we will close the list. We have enough individuals registered. If anybody has been left out, then we can register it afterwards. But we have numerous different individuals registered. Now, our next speaker is colleague Good.
The Commissioner, some facts and figures. Poland today versus Poland 8 years ago. Bread 3.30, today 6 zlotys. The government can afford it. Butter 3.60 then. Now 7 zloty. This is our welfare. This is our El Dorado. The sunflower oil costs 13 PLN per liter. This is your bread and water plus the new benefit of the government. People are striving to make ends meet. People are pawning their wedding rings. Elderly people cannot afford medicines. Public TV is not showing it. We have 17% of inflation. The average for the Eurozone is 9%. Have you issued some recommendations to the Polish government about cutting inflation? Have you identified some specific instruments that should be triggered? If not, please act quickly. Thank you.
Herr Kollege Kohut, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, please.
Czy pytanie właściwie...
Well, I'm not sure if this is a question to me. I gather that this is your reflection process on the prices in Poland. But if you look at those prices, Poland is not the country that was affected most in Europe. Some countries have more than 50%. Others fall somewhere between 30 and 40%. Lithuania 34.7%, Latvia 31.1%, Estonia 29%. All those countries have a higher inflation rate than Poland. Romania 22.6%, Slovakia 28%, Poland has 22%. Yes, we are above the average as Poland, but we are not in a group of those countries that were affected most painfully. We don't have any recommendations for Poland now because this is not the role of the Commission to issue such recommendations. But even if Poland wouldn't be one of the first countries concerned, because Poland doesn't have the highest inflation rate in Europe.
Vielen Dank. Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now, I simply wanted to say that we have 90 minutes for this period. We have 18 questions which are possible, and it's divided by the different groups. We'll have to improve this particular procedure so that it's all more transparent for you. Now, I have the particular registrations. Reitz, Maro, Avram, Sartone, Ilcic, Hasekamp, Keller, Maki, Ontinelli, De Castro, Gun, Lavacek, and Motlo. And then we have Le Breton and Kutzmiuk, the leftovers. But they shall take the floor. So if somebody is missing, they can take their place. But we'll have to think about how we can manage this in the future. But anyway, colleague Weiss, you have the floor.
Chair and Commissioner, yes, indeed, energy and energy inflation related to the Ukraine war is the main driver of food prices. But there's two more factors that are, let's say, not put in the light as much as we need to. On the one hand, there's the big food companies that have made use of the crisis already during the COVID crisis, raising the prices of the foodstuff they are providing to the wholesalers in an illegitimate way. That even resulted to the very specific situation that big wholesale companies were threatening companies like Mars or Nestle or Unilever to delist their products because they were not accepting their raise in prices. Do you have any further information on that, especially on the windfall profits this resulted to in these companies? And the second factor is speculation. We're having speculation on food as commodities. And it's not about the question whether there's hedge contracts for fixed price production dealt on a market, but the question is whether we allow speculation on rising or lowering food prices on grains, on pork meat, and so on. Is there any indication from your side now to actually give us research on how much speculation contributes to the food prices?
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Weitz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weitz.
Herr Kommissar Wojciechowski.
Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Oczywiście, tak jak powiedziałem wcześniej.
Well, certainly, as I've already said before, we cannot exclude and rule out speculation. I would like to spell it out very clearly that we need to safeguard the competition and the rules governing competition in the individual member states, and this is the responsibility of the relevant bodies, national bodies. We have not received any significant signals indicating that speculation has got a significant impact on food prices. No, we see that the increase in food prices is the consequence of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and which translated also into energy prices. All these cost factors had inevitably to find their reflection in food prices. As for the bodies, the organizations that are purchasing food produce from farmers, well, clearly farmers are still the weaker party facing those large companies. Although the situation differs from country to country, in some member states farmers are better organized and they are stronger and more united. We also have member states where there are specific instruments that have been introduced in order to strengthen the position of farmers. We also see such proposals in the strategic plans. We also have the directive, which was adopted in 2019 and which is currently being implemented, the directive on combating unfair practices in food trade. So a lot will depend on its adequate implementation. The directive proposes instruments that will be protecting farmers against any form of abuse by other market bodies.
Thank you, Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Weitz.
Commissioner, if we provide you with concrete evidence and concrete information on actual speculation on foodstuff that happened the last 2 years, will you ask your authorities, your services, to actually do concrete research on it and provide us with data?
Herr Kommissar.
Commissioner.
Such information we will very seriously consider. Okay.
Vielen Dank. Also
Thank you very much. Well, so you can see we can have supplementary questions. Now, please, I do beg your indulgence. This question time is a new tool. We've been running it in for a few months. It's coming from the focus groups. You have recommendations and indications. You can see from your console if you're registered or not. If you leave, then you leave. Now, we're still trying to optimize the procedure. The next speaker is Mr. Amaro.
Herr Kollege Amaro.
Mr. Amaro.
You were foreseen. There is no reason to complain.
Presidente, Sr. Comissário.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, we know what we're talking about here. Farmers' incomes are not increasing in line with other increases. Now, it's important that there be alignment. The question exercising myself and many other colleagues is this, and I'd like the Commission to be objective about this. In seeking to solve this income gap, you've taken certain actions. What the Commission has said boils down to just two things: the CAP and strategic plans. Within the CAP, in the Member States' policies, I'm sorry, Commissioner, it's really not very much. What we want is for the Commission to square up to the real facts where farmers' incomes are suffering. You need special measures to compensate them. The CAP wasn't designed to fight inflation. It's unfair when it comes to defending farmers if we just refer to the CAP and those strategic plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amaro. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Ja się zgodzę z panem posłem, że
I can only agree with you that the CAP and the entire EU budget are not ready for this level of inflation. We are always ready for some level of inflation because we have a two-digit adjustment rate, but we were not prepared for the enormity of this crisis. First we had the pandemic, now we have the brutal war caused by the Russian aggression. This is a new situation. We were not in this situation when the budget was adopted in July 2020. We already had the pandemic, but we had no idea that soon there would be a war ravaging Europe. This is a problem because you rightly referred to specific instruments. Let me repeat one more time. The Commission has done everything in its power to increase the supply of food. This is decisive for the prices. We have suspended, not revoked, but suspended for this year the provisions on non-production areas that normally would have to be set aside. The same applies to obligatory crop rotation. So we have suspended all the instruments that would bring down the production level. We have triggered the crisis reserve. We have the private storage aid. We wanted to remove all the obstacles hampering the increase in food production and potentially bringing up the prices. I don't know what else we could do. Some measures are within the budget, such as more money for crisis intervention. We have 500 million euro under the crisis reserve. The crisis is huge, so I concur with you that this is not enough. Our budget currently is 0.4% of the EU GDP. This is the CAP, 0.4 of the GDP. And this policy is responsible for food security and for environmental security alike. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Ms. Avram is the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We see all these statistics coming from the member states, from international organizations, and they are quite worrisome, as the consequences are. Romania ended the year 2022 with a 22% increase in the price of food products. And this has led to a gradual disparition of products from shops, and to the fact that the program for the distribution of milk and fruits in schools has been blocked half the country, because the farmers simply could not afford to sell at those prices to schools anymore. Over 40% of Romanian children are now at risk of poverty and social exclusion. And that meal that they were getting from the school was maybe the only source of food that they had during the day. The forecast for 2023 shows that 50% more Romanians will live in absolute poverty. My question, Commissioner, is do you see any real solution to this crisis, which first and foremost affects children and their food? Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Avram.
Thank you, Ms. Avram. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani poseł. No,
Thank you very much for this.
z przykrością potwierdzić te dane, które pani mówi. Rzeczywiście w Rumunii jest wysoka inflacja, choć też nie należy ona do najwyższych. Jest kilka krajów.
Thank you very much.
Inflation in Romania is high, although there is a number of countries where inflation rates are greater. But in Romania, the key problem is that income of farmers has gone down. I have been mentioning that overall in the European Union, we've seen 13% hike in the revenue of farmers, but in Romania, we see a 21% reduction in farming revenue. Farmers' revenue. This is very fresh data. We will be analyzing such data in the context of individual member states and the entire European Union. We need to perhaps envisage specific action. Nobody has mentioned this so far, but during the discussion, but we also see very acute problems in member states that have direct borders with Ukraine, because the consequences of the war in Ukraine have been affecting farmers in those member states in a much more acute way. That's a problem of Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia. Free trade with Ukraine, which is very much needed and which is very strongly supported by the European Commission, is also leading to certain negative consequences to farmers in these countries, in these member states, who are facing difficulties with selling their produce. And this is a problem that we are currently analyzing. And perhaps we will need to think about applying the reserve the crisis reserve in case of those member states. We are thinking about improving the situation. And returning to the situation in Romania, I believe that there is a link between the two. The proximity of the war arena, this proximity, this neighborhood issue is affecting especially those member states which are the closest. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wojciechowski. The next speaker is Ms. Sardoni.
latte più 14%, uova.
Milk 14%, eggs 50%, bread and cereals, numerous different percentages as well as far as the increase in prices. These are only indicative of the situation in Italy. Now, in Europe, what is the Commission doing about this situation? What do they plan to do? My impression is that they're asleep. Criminalizing suppliers, farmers, providing good circumstances for synthetic meat to be produced. But what is going to be done now? We have to have some sort of system which penalizes those which boost up or jack up the prices for no reason whatsoever. Look at the situation in the wine sector as well. In this particular context, I think that indeed we need a new regulation with regard to packaging as well, which would penalize any sort of counterfeit products or illegitimate products as well. And have you taken into consideration that the cost at this particular point is the whole burden of it is being borne by consumers? Something has to be done about this.
Thank you, Ms. Sardone. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję pani.
Thank you very much for this question. When it comes to Italy, you are better off than an average EU country, because the inflation of food prices in the whole EU is 18.3%, but for Italy it amounts to 13.8%, so you are better off. You are significantly below the average for the EU inflation. I cannot talk about all the activities of the EU. I have to focus on agriculture. And as far as agriculture is concerned, the recent decisions by the Commission show that there is a reflection process that we want to facilitate, that we don't want to make lives more difficult for farmers. We have a financial regulation concerning the CAP, including important provisions allowing not to penalize farmers for small irregularities which are not their fault or which are a result of force majeure. So we are open-minded. We do not want to be repressive towards farmers. With regard to Italian agriculture, I think it's a good practice, a good model, a good network of connections between production, processing and local markets. There are many good examples here to be followed by other member states. Yes, the input costs are higher, so everyone is affected to a smaller or higher extent. Inflation is painful to everyone. Farmers are struggling with input costs everywhere, but as I have already said, Italy is anyway better off than other member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Now, Mr. Ilčić.
Poštovani povjereniče, Commissioner, the market has clear principles of actions, and it's difficult for politics to prevent it. If there is a surplus of a particular product, the price falls, and then if there is a deficit, the price is higher. The growth of food prices that we talk about now is certainly the consequence of a reduced production, especially in the European Union, because of the high ecological standards that are the highest in the world. In addition, during these 17 days, when, according to the President of the European Commission, we have successfully introduced the euro, in Croatia, food prices have increased an additional 20%. And according to studies presented at the Committee for Agriculture, the production of food in the EU will continue to be reduced, as well as farmers' revenues, and we will have to import more and more food from third countries of dubious quality. Therefore, I'm asking if the Commission will work on the fact that the same ecological standards are going to be requested of food imported from third countries, the ones produced in the EU. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Ilčić. Herr Kommissar.
Thank you, Mr. Ilčić. Commissioner.
Panie pośle, to oczywiście te...
Well, yes, of course. Those equal standards and the application of the reciprocity rule in trade with third parties is a constant item during all of our negotiations concerning free trade agreements, which are being concluded with partners such as, for instance, New Zealand recently. These provisions are always implemented. On the other hand, we need to respect the rules of the WTO, which is not always very easy to. It is not always very easy to ensure that elevated EU standards can be adhered to whenever they go beyond the World Trade generalized standards, because in certain cases they might be seen as unwarranted, unjustified barriers to trade, because we don't want the European Union to be seen and perceived as creating such barriers, because we've got a considerable surplus in production. We want to make sure that our trade with the external world, outside world, is as open and as free as possible. So we're taking this into account. But you have underscored a very important item. The European Union has got the highest standards in terms of food quality and security. We have safety. We have a very elevated environmental food production standards. And what is happening right now is that we need to pay more to farmers for adhering to these standards. And we will start paying farmers for making sure that certain standards are observed, even those standards that used to be observed prior to that date. For instance, animal welfare. We are going to be paying out special amounts concerning better welfare. So all these elements which constitute high standards in the European farming will be rewarded. Farmers will be rewarded for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And a supplementary question, Mr. Ilčić.
Poštovani povjereniče,
Dear Commissioner, I really respect your efforts, but as opposed from my colleagues from the left, I don't see sustainability in the Commission helping these or those when the price of food is increased. We have to have the conditions for producing enough food in the European Union. We mustn't be stricter to the European Union producers than those from third countries. Is your priority?
Also erstens weise ich mal darauf hin.
Well, I'd just like to point out, because I already switched this off, so I apologize to the interpreters. This is question time for a good reason. We need to restrict ourselves to putting questions. When it comes to supplementary questions, you then came with a point of view. That is not why we have the question time. And as we have too many requests for the floor, I think we have to respect, first of all, that you don't overdraw on your speaking time, and secondly, you stick to your question. Mrs. Hazekamp next.
Ja, dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, food is a human right, and we must ensure that everyone has access to healthy food. According to Commission research, we see that there is a risk of increasing food prices, leading to people not eating healthily. But sustainable healthy food must be an accessible option, and that can be done if you get rid of VAT on fruit and vegetables across the European Union. How is the Commission going to ensure that citizens in all member states have access to fruit and vegetables without VAT? Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Hazekamp.
Thank you, Ms. Hazekamp. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Of course, this is one of the tools that could possibly be used to increase the affordability of healthy food. Such tax incentives could be envisaged scrapping VAT or at least decreasing the VAT rate. Well, this is not my job to make promises in this respect. Other colleagues are responsible for this, as I'm very sure you understand, but I would welcome this direction of travel. Decreasing taxes or scrapping taxes to help people, especially the poorest ones. We have such schemes such as fruit and vegetables at school. We have different instruments making it possible to give food to charity. We are in favor.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kelleher now.
Yes, food inflation is 18%, input costs to farmers running at 24%. Inflation is having a significant impact on lower income families across Europe, and is now having a significant impact on farmers to be able to produce food itself. So to ask the Commission, first and foremost, what is it going to do in terms of addressing the input costs, primarily fertilizer and other commodity costs like protein feeds for animals, for example, to convert to meat or milk production? And that is going to be a significant challenge. Now, I would like to know what efforts will be made to displace the importation of soya, maize, oilseed with crops grown in Europe under the protein strategy. And finally, Commissioner, we never have had an impact assessment on farm to fork, on the biodiversity strategy or on the Green Deal itself. So is it not time that we would have an impact assessment on the strategies to ensure that some of the strategies aren't adding further to the difficulties regarding price inflation and food inflation?
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję za to pytanie.
Thank you very much for this question concerning the farm-to-fork strategy. Certainly, the strategy, being a political document, does not contain a requirement of performing the impact analysis of the overall strategy. But we are looking at the individual elements within the context of its implementation, and we do conduct impact assessment for these. Thank you very much for reminding us about this strategy, because this strategy contains a lot of elements that are supporting the shortening of this path from farm to fork, which is a very long one at the moment. And as we talk about food prices, we also need to think about the influence of transport cost. Only less than one third of food is transported over a distance of less than 50 kilometers. 2/3 of food travels over 50 kilometers and 7% over 500 kilometers within the European Union, which is also pushing up the cost of food. So if we can support this short supply chain, this will also contribute to a reduction of food prices. And this is why the implementation of short supply chains and possibility of direct sale of food, these activities are envisaged by the strategy. Many member states have implemented these or introduced them into their strategic plans, and we are attaching a lot of hope to that, because we hope that this will significantly reduce the price of food, because the modern CAP with shorter supply chains will be contributing to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Kelleher, supplementary.
Would the Commissioner not agree that we should base all our policies on concrete data and on scientific evidence? And we have to move beyond hope. We have to make decisions knowing the potential outcome and impact that those decisions will have. And our production capacity, our competitiveness, our import costs, and ultimately the cost to consumers will increase. We know that definitively, and now we have the added additional problems with regard to the cost of fertilizer and other inputs into the food chain in the European Union. So all I'm asking, I'm not opposing, I support it, but we have to do it on science.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Dziękuję, panie pośle. No, oczywiście.
Thank you very much. Well, we certainly base ourselves on scientific evidence. At least me, myself, I am doing that. And I look at such analysis in the area of agriculture, but also economy. I'm analyzing the situation throughout the European Union. And also, what is extremely important, we need to look at differences between different member states, which is also a certain source of difficulties in our programming at the EU level, because farming structures are different in different member states and challenges are different as well. And this is why we went very strongly towards greater flexibility of CAP. We've got national, let me repeat, national strategic plans, and I believe that this will allow us to better adjust the agricultural policy to the situation in the individual member states in line with scientific evidence. And I would like to take this opportunity, responding to your question and one of the earlier questions as well, because this is a recurring theme. I hear that we are reducing or curbing the farming production. Let me stress once again that under the current CAP, there are no instruments that would be intentionally reducing the production, even though there used to be such instruments. We could think that perhaps the set-aside requirement and the rotation of crops, these could be seen as potentially reducing production in short term, although they increase food security in longer term. These have been suspended. As they might have reduced our crops in the short term. So today, CAP, as it stands, as it is implemented, does not contain any instrument that would lead directly to reducing food production by farmers. There is a possibility of producing more. Of course, we are taking into account the fact that this production should not be valid only for today, but also tomorrow and for the future generations. So sustainability in agriculture is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, colleague Markey, please.
Thank you, Chair. We've all seen last year just how vulnerable our food supply is and how vulnerable food security is and how it has impacted on so many people. Well, I've listened to the figures you've given us here today, where less than 0.4% of GDP is spent on food production, and only 500 million of a crisis reserve. Well, if you divide that out by 10 million farmers, that's less than €50 per farmer across Europe. Well, I have one question for you. As the farmers' representative within the Commission, what are you doing to increase that budget? What are you doing to reduce them input costs? And what are you doing to increase fertilizer supply? Because clearly these are issues that are driving up the price of food across Europe. And we want to know what the representative of agriculture is doing within the Commission to address this situation.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Markey.
Thank you very much, colleague Markey. Commissioner, please.
Dziękuję, panie pośle.
Thank you very much for your question. The current budget of the CAP, the budget implemented now starting from 2021, this budget is not 365 billion euro, but 22 billion more. So we have had an increase as compared to the original project. I do not want to boast, but it was my initiative to increase this budget. It was a precedence in our history. For the first time, we have had such an increase as compared to the initial proposal by the Council. But yes, 0.4% of GDP, whereby our challenges are so huge and the crisis is so profound. Yes, this is not enough. This is not enough to ensure food security in the long term. So I keep talking about it. I keep talking about it decisively on many public fora during many occasions. This is my plan. I cannot make any promises or make any statements on behalf of the whole College of Commissioners. I don't have a mandate to do this. I can only speak about what I will try to do, and this is my pledge, indeed, that I will try to make it happen. In the future, we should have more money, especially when it comes to crisis management measures. During the crisis, farmers cannot be left to their own devices. Our instruments are intended for an ordinary situation with occasional problems requiring our intervention. But today we are not talking about small distortions, but about a huge permanent burden and a huge risk. Climate risk, political risk, there is a war. But we also had the pandemic, which affected agriculture painfully. So our CAP, if it is to remain a common agriculture policy, it needs to be stronger, it needs to have a bigger budget, and it needs to have more instruments to respond to crises and to help farmers. This will be our priority when we will be working on the initial working hypotheses and project vision for the next budget. Of course, this will be up to the next commissioner to do it, but I will try to prepare the ground for it so that the CAP becomes stronger. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. An additional question?
Commissioner, to quote your own words in relation to what are you doing in relation to this, I keep talking about it. That's what the translation came to me. Surely the money you talk about, the 500 million crisis reserve fund, that is part of the existing budget. My question is, what additional money and what new efforts have been made? Number one, to provide additional money, but equally to ensure an increase in supply of fertilizer, to drive more competition into the market and drive down prices, to generally reduce the cost of production, and to ensure that for those vulnerable people all across Europe, we can provide a cheap and affordable food. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Marki. Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, colleague Marki. Commissioner, please.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I have already flagged what has been done. We did have a debate on this. We had a debate on a document, the communication of the European Commission on fertilizers. You will remember this. State aid for producers. There was such a risk. It was a significant risk that the EU would stop producing fertilizers because the production plants were not able to face the huge input costs, i.e. energy and gas. There was a risk that they would have to stop, that they would have to stop that production or propose such prices which would in no way be sustainable for farmers. With our communication as the Commission, we have responded to the needs of the sector. We made it possible to give state aid to farmers. I know that perhaps you are going to say that state aid is not a solution, because state aid may be harmful. It may distort the single market and create conditions hampering a level playing field. But we are going through a crisis, so we have no choice but to make state aid possible. And we did this. This pertains to farmers affected by a spike in fertilizer costs, up to 250,000 euro per holding. This is allowed, this is possible. It's not like this that I myself, I am an enthusiast of this solution. Ideally speaking, we would have a level playing field, a perfect level playing field, and a market-based mechanism, because not everyone, not every country can afford to pay state aid, but we had to give this possibility when faced with the crisis. The Commission has spoken out and said clearly that if the Member States want to modify their strategic plans in order to beef up the situation of farmers using organic fertilizers, in order to help them, make them less dependent on expensive synthetic fertilizers, if a Member State wants to do it, we will correct the strategic plans very quickly to pave the way for this, to increase the independence of farmers. So this is what we can do as of now, for the time being. And let me repeat that, yes, it's a huge challenge. 0.4 GDP is the money that we have at our disposal. And we need to ensure food security and the highest, the strictest standards when it comes to environment and climate. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Wojciechowski.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Our next speaker is colleague Rondinelli.
Signor Commissario. Thank you, President. Commissioner, farmers are on the verge of collapse. I'll give you a few figures regarding inflation in my country, Italy. 170% for fertilizers, 90% for feed, 129% for diesel, and 500% increase in energy costs for irrigating fields. It's not just that 1 in 3 farms are at risk of closing. There's a risk to the whole CAP's existence. And so I believe the proposal to bring forward the revision of the CAP to next summer is quite inadequate. Now, what I would ask you to do is this. Why don't you propose a package right now, before it's too late, so that we can reduce the impact of inflation and offset the reduction in value of their incomes in the CAP, because they're losing 30% of their value. You can support farmers without changing the current budget structure by using the new own resources flowing from the emissions tax. So it's just a question of having the political will to adopt that decision. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin Rondinelli. Herr Kommissar Wojciechowski, bitte.
Thank you very much, Madam Rondinelli. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję bardzo. No ja mogę powiedzieć.
Thank you very much for this question. All that I can say is you do not need to try to convince me. I am pretty convinced of that. I believe that such a review and reassessment is necessary. We need to look at the CAP budget in the context of inflation. But let me also remind you that this budget was slow in coming, and there was a lot of discussion, difficult discussion. CAP was the object of discussion and polemics. A large part of the public opinion did not really like the extent of financing provided by CAP. So increasing this budget would be a political challenge. All member states would have to agree to that. Budget, the size of the budget, is not something that the European Commission can decide upon by a single decision. This is a process which I personally would like to initiate. We also need to make others aware of the fact that if we make our farmers stronger, if we can provide sustainable base for the future food production, if we can empower farmers so that they can actually meet environmental requirements that are in place, this all will require us to have a stronger budget, a stronger crisis management instruments. We need to try to convince those that have the final say, that is the member states and their citizens, the citizens of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Our next speaker is colleague De Castro.
Sì. Grazie, Presidente. Grazie.
Well, thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. You know very well that with the increase in prices, we have millions of families in Europe suffering. And the effort that has been made in order to confront this particular situation, which is very complicated. Now, I'd like to add something to this particular battle, because inflation means something for consumers. It also means something for the agricultural sector as well. Not long ago, last August, the Biden administration introduced the Inflation Reduction Act, an important intervention instrument in the United States, where billions of dollars were earmarked, and the measures for the agricultural sector in the United States is a $20 billion package only for agriculture, investments for sustainability of production. My question is the following: Why, with these difficulties that we have before us right now, with the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, why Europe can't respond as the United States responded with that particular support package for farmers?
De Castro.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Castro. Commissioner, please. Commissioner Wojciechowski.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much for your question. This question goes beyond the remit of this debate and beyond my mandate as it is today. It goes beyond the issues of agriculture. Yes, the European Commission is discussing this issue and considering its possible response to what the US administration has done. You will remember that the European Commission has made it possible to pay state aid to support the economy, including agriculture. I'm relying here on data as of the end of November. Aid amounted to 450 billion euro that was spent, or that was earmarked and endorsed, out of it 90% to be spent by France and Germany, all this to alleviate the impact of the war. The fact that there are two major economies dominated here may be problematic, but I don't want to dwell on this. Less than 1% of the state aid went to agriculture, even though it is eligible. We have 250,000 euro as a possibility per holding. Under the current budget, state aid is a good tool. It's a good tool in a crisis situation. It's not an ideal tool for the single market in general. A lot here hinges on the individual capacities of the member states. Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Our next speaker is colleague de Kuhnen.
Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Kommissar.
President, Commissioner, Eurobarometer shows that 93% of European citizens are very concerned about the increase in food prices, and they notice this every day. But what the Eurobarometer survey also shows us that 94% of people want to live in an environment, work and enjoy a sustainable environment. And of course, part and parcel of this is an ecological environment and economy. So the prices of organic agriculture have increased far less than conventional agricultural products. So this has shown once again its strength. So we don't want to see a reduction of environmental standards. On the contrary, we need to see an increase in environmental standards. Hence my question to you, is there something that can be done in the short term to strengthen this particular beneficial cycle in the long term? How do you intend to make sure that this flows into the common agricultural policy?
Grunenberg, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, colleague Deparne-Grün. Commissioner, please.
Thank you very much for this question. I cannot but agree to all that you've said. This is true that organic farming seems to be resilient, especially under the COVID crisis. This is when we saw an increase in consumer interest in organic farming products. We do have a plan for developing organic farming and organic farming production, which is very detailed. Some member states are working on drafting their own national plans in this area, so we are very strongly supporting organic farming. The development plan, this new regulation also, which has been implemented recently, which includes some facilitating measures concerning group certification and very strong instruments supporting such farming in CAP in both first and second pillars. I haven't got this data at hand, but the amounts that have been earmarked for supporting organic farming have been increased, and I deeply believe that it will keep developing. I share your opinion. The development of organic farming constitutes an alternative solution to many farms which are facing the dilemma of whether to be an organic farmer or quit farming altogether. So this is a way out of this dilemma, because we hear very often that organic farming is more costly and it will not contribute to food security. I do not share this view. I believe that organic farming supports and strengthens food security. We want to develop it, and member states have received very strong instruments supporting that, especially in the strategic plans. So they can draw upon both pillars, the first and the second. Thank you.
Eine Nachfrage, Frau Kollegin Deparne-Grunenberg.
Our colleague has an additional question.
Kommissar, was Sie aufgeführt haben.
Yes, what you've just said is very logical, Commissioner, and this role of being dependent on petrochemical intensive agriculture. We need to show the error of these ways with figures. And that's why organic farming is done very well. Hence my question, what specific instruments do we have for the coming CAP round to take on board the fact that public money will go for public produce?
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin. Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, colleague. Commissioner, please.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I can only say that I was personally working on making sure that organic farming is included in eco schemes, the practices that are being implemented in those farms, so that independently of the support to farming could also be provided by eco schemes. And I wanted to have a maximum support in the second pillar. And please believe me that we had very tough negotiations with all member states as we encouraged them to provide a very strong support to organic farming, to increase their environmental ambitions. And the index that we want to achieve, 25% of organic farming in the European Union by 2030, well, I'm not absolutely sure whether we will be reaching this target of 25%, because it is a huge effort, and it is not only up to farmers, but we are on the right path towards achieving that. There is a lot of interest on the part of farmers, and it will also depend on our skill, on our ability to increase demand for organic farming products. This is very important for farmers. This is all open. there may be preferences to organic farming products. For instance, organizations that are providing food and catering to larger groups of people can also have a preference for organic produce. And this is also legal and appropriate. So we have great hopes. We hope that already in 2027, as we wrap up the CAP or during its review, we will see a stronger position of organic farmers. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege Wojciechowski.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Our next speaker is colleague Lavacek.
Pane komisaři, inflace drtí Evropu a ceny potravin se na tom.
Thank you, Commissioner. Inflation is skyrocketing. This affects all prices in Europe, including food prices, and I hope we won't be seeing the same levels of inflation this year as last. So something has to be done. We can't just have plans on paper. They have to be reflected in reality. A study from Edinburgh University have said that the main problem with prices of energy and fertilizers are really at the core of this. I know you've undertaken a lot, but the strategy that you have framed is weak. I'd like to support you, but at the same time request of you, can we not make a further step towards resolving these issues? Please work with Commissioner Simpson so that we have a clear framework for the production of fertilizers. Talk with Commissioner Timmermans so that we can have a rapid transition to green sources for fertilizers. Speak with Ms. Kyriakides so that the margins can be achieved.
Thank you very much. When it comes to fertilizers and their availability and affordability, the Commission speaks with one voice and works in one direction. We have had a document on fertilizers. It was adopted. No one was against. There was a consensus on this. So I can only reassure you that we are working together as a team here. The instruments at our disposal have been used. We were racking our brains to try and think what more can be done. How can we help farmers? For the time being, I don't know what could be added to this communication. I don't see any potential to add something to this. Of course, the uptake of these incentives in the member states is of key importance here. How will the member states support organic fertilizers? A lot can be done. Eco-schemes. When it comes to eco-schemes, we are not imposing anything. It's up to the member states to use them upon taking into account the individual specificities. Energy prices. Everyone here is well aware that there have been disputes in the Council. It was a very controversial issue. It was very hard to take decisions in this respect. We all know that the member states tend to differ on a number of issues, and their interests are not always convergent, so the decision-making process was difficult. But we did arrive at the price caps for gas. It was a huge step, which should go a long way towards improving the situation of fertilizer producers, farmers, and consumers. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Wojciechowski. Colleague Modler is our next speaker.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Well, thank you very much, President. Commissioner, the issue today is not only a problem of member states, because, of course, the situation in the Ukraine has had effects throughout the world. 50% of the wheat in the world is hoarded by China, and they've stocked up on that. So we have increases in prices internationally. International companies are making major profits on all of this. And at the same time, farmers are in a difficult situation in dire straits. So why the Commission, under these particular circumstances, has not looked at the major restoration law, and secondly, the fertilizers, natural fertilizers, on the one hand, and on the other hand, however, the Commission is doing everything so that livestock raising in Europe, that it be reduced considerably. So those two issues together, brought together, what is your point of that? Thank you very much, colleague Modler. Commissioner Wojciechowski, you have the floor, please.
Dziękuję bardzo. Nie sądzę, żeby można było stwierdzić, że...
Thank you very much. You could say that the Commission strives to limit production or breeding. No, the Commission rather is in favor of animal welfare. Over the last decade, the number of livestock in Europe fell from 122 million of cattle. Now we have 113 pieces of livestock. We have fewer mixed farms now. I mean by this, those which combine plant production and animal production. It is a shame, and we should go towards restoring such forms of production, because such farms are more sustainable, more balanced. They produce their own feeds or fertilizers. Now we have also the eco schemes, which should translate into improving of the situation now. Now, as regards animal production, there are no reasons to limit such production. However, intensity of such animal production is quite different throughout Europe. There are countries and there are sectors of production where we see a lot of intensification, where animal farming is turned into an industry. We don't support turning agriculture into industry. But sustainable balanced production and animal welfare is supported under CAP. In the previous financial framework, we had 1.5 billion, and now we have 7.5 billion euros, so 5 times as much money. So I think this is quite an important support for animal production. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Die Fragestunde ist da.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This closes the question time. The next agenda item
Als nächster Punkt der Tagesordnung.
So the next point on the agenda is a statement from the Commission on the latest developments in the corruption allegations and influence of Morocco, efforts to improve transparency and accountability in the European institutions. I'll give the Commission the opportunity to change over as rapidly as possible.
Und im Vorsitz auch.
And we'll also have a change of president.